Hi everyone. Just wanted to touch base with you about our next design module for the Timeline JS artifact and the due dates for this. The artifact itself is due on September 24th, at which time we'll do the peer reviews again for 3 of your classmates. And then the following week, the following Sunday, your rationale and design critiques are due. Just a note on the peer reviews. So you each should be assigned 3 different peer reviews to look at 3 other students' artifacts. And if for some reason that student doesn't have one submitted or you can't view it, then you can just make that as a comment in your review saying there's no submission here, or I can't view this submission. And then for the rationale, that's basically a 500-word or so document where you're explaining your design choices. And I've had a lot of questions about this design critique. And so the purpose behind the design critique is for you to find another example of this type of design. So in this case, for this module, we're looking at temporal structures. You would use those websites that I provided in the directions to find an example of another temporal structure or time-based structure or timeline. And then you would critique it in terms of its aesthetic, its appeal, its effectiveness. And then you want to make sure that you are using terminology, terms from the Morales text. So use her language when you're describing the example that you're critiquing. As I mentioned, this module is based on a temporal structure, which is time-based, and we're using this online tool called Timeline JS. And essentially how that works is once you create an account, you can make a timeline, and it has a couple of different steps for you to follow. You're going to need to get this Google spreadsheet template, and it looks sort of like this. It looks really clunky, and it is really clunky. This is how you enter all of the data points onto your timeline. Here's an example of my timeline that I've already created. It's just very simple, very basic, but I'm showing you what I'm calling the smartphone lineage, just the lineage of the types of smartphones that I've owned over the years. So I'm doing this on a yearly timeline. I'm showing you the different phones. I could go starting with Q, I could go back even further, and then I have the iPhone. I could keep going with this as much as I wanted. But that's essentially what the timeline will look like eventually. But the data is coming from here. So all of the information that I'm inputting to get to this timeline, I'm inputting onto this sheet. And so over here in the red columns, this is where you'll add the information. So let's say, I'm just going to delete this whole row. And I'm going to start here, and I'm going to say I wanted to start with something in 2011. Maybe you have the month and the day, maybe you don't. So if not, you can take those out. Same thing with the end dates. So let's say 2007 to 2008. And this is the headline that would show up in your timeline. And let's just say Motorola Q is a type of phone that I owned, and then the text is the text that shows up beneath it, so I could give a little description. You'll also want to include an image that goes along with your timeline. So what I would do is I would just go to Google, and I would search for the image that you're looking for. Just do a basic image search. I have all these different images here, and let's say I like this one here. The way that you would grab the URL for this image, is if you right-click on the image, copy image address, and then in here, I can paste the link right here, and that's what makes that image show up in your timeline. You don't have to give it a media credit, and you don't have to give it a caption. So that's about it. I would also post that URL here under the media thumbnail column. And so that's really about it. That's the information that you would put. That would give you, for example, this right here. That's what would show up. It would show you the image that you just used, the title or the headline, and then the description beneath it. And on the timeline below it, it would span whatever date you had posted here, start to finish. So you want to do this for a number of different things. And the question is, what are you making a timeline of, and how is it related to your data? That is going to depend on the type of data that you are collecting. So for example, you could, in my example, I'm using a yearly timeline, so I'm looking at something across many years and the different phones that I've owned. But you can do a timeline that is, let's say, just 1 day long, right? And it's starting from the time you wake up to the time that you go to bed. And within that day, at certain points throughout the day, you can mark different data points that have to deal with your data collection topic. So if you're looking at something like, let's say, nutrition throughout the day, you're counting calories or whatever it might be, you might want to, throughout your daily timeline, show what a typical breakfast would be, a typical snack, a typical lunch, after lunch snack, dinner, whatever it might be. So your timeline could consist of just 1 day, 24 hours, or it could be years in the making. It just needs to relate to your data topic. It doesn't have to necessarily include your data that you've been collecting. Of course, it can, but we wouldn't typically use a timeline to display our data information that we're collecting with our self-quantification. We're not collecting, or we're not trying to visualize the data just yet. This is more of along the lines of the Kaggle relational structure. We're just showing the relationship between concepts or ideas that are related to your topic. So that's the timeline project, and you'll have to follow these steps closely for it to work. It does take a little bit of effort to get this thing to look right. And then when it's all said and done, you can post your timeline, the URL, in Canvas by copying the link and posting it in Canvas. I do have a link in the companion text to an introductory video that helps you get started, that explains it a little bit more. I have a link to my example that I was just showing you. But that's our second design artifact. So don't forget that I do have office hours on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And if you need help, you're more than welcome to drop by, and I can help you individually. Otherwise, if you have questions, send me an email or a message in Canvas. And so far, you all have been doing some really great work with your design artifacts and the rationales and critiques. So keep up the good work, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you.